Everything in the path of the tornado, it took it.
A tornado in Louisville? Ridiculous.
My golly, the whole thing's going, yep, I'm going, come on.
This area is no longer an effective community.
The devastation was just beyond comprehension.
And we couldn't have made it without, of course, God's grace saved us.
That was a wild, wild day. That day, of course, more tornadoes occurred than any time in history around the United States. It was a wild outbreak that day.
People of every generation can remember precisely where they were during certain momentous occasions in their lives. For instance, in my parents' generation, it was Pearl Harbor Day. My generation was the day John F. Kennedy was assassinated. For younger generations today may look back some date in the future to the day President Reagan was shot, or the Space Shuttle Challenger disaster day. But for those of us living in this area on April 3rd, 1974, only one word is needed to bring back memories of that day: tornado. On April 3rd into the early morning hours of the 4th of 1974, 148 tornadoes struck 13 states in the southeast, Midwest, and up into Canada. Over 300 people died. Property damage amounted to over $500 million. It wasn't the first time a tornado had struck the Louisville area. About 8 o'clock in the evening on March 27, 1890, a twister touched down in the Parkland area. It cut a path reported to be 6 blocks wide, destroying Union Depot. This shed collapsed and buried a railroad car. After striking Jeffersonville, Indiana briefly, the tornado came back across the river to Louisville's waterworks, damaging it. Over 100 people died, and damage was estimated at $2.5 million. The twister destroyed or damaged a number of businesses in downtown Louisville, including these at 8th and Main. Other towns wanted to rally to Louisville's aid, but community pride led the city to refuse all such offers. The city came through with its own generosity. Within a few days, $115,000 had been raised for disaster relief. It would be 35 years before once again tornadoes came back to the Louisville metropolitan area. That was March 18, 1925. And then once again, April 3, 1974, the winds of destruction once again returned to Kentucky and southern Indiana.
We all knew that severe thunderstorms were going to happen that day. In fact, they happened 2 days prior to that. Coming into work, we knew it was going to be a busy night.
And it was. Of the more than 100 tornadoes which struck the U.S. that day, Kentucky and Indiana were right in the middle of the outbreak, but neighboring states were affected as well. In Huntsville, Alabama, the search for the injured and dead was hampered by darkness. In Xenia, Ohio, a twister first touched down in a subdivision south of town. 38 people died, more than anywhere else that day. Rescuers worked through the night to get the injured to hospitals and identify the dead. In Kentucky and southern Indiana alone, the tornadoes were felt as far north as Brownstown over to Madison and as far south as Bowling Green to Corbin. This one was the first to affect the area. Southern Indiana was hit hard. DePaul, Palmyra, Martinsburg, and Borden all felt the brunt of this tornado. This is what the scene of destruction looked like in Daisy Hill near Borden, but the storms had just begun. The supercell thunderstorm, which produced the Palmyra-Borden tornado, then shifted its attention to the Hanover-Madison area as it produced a second major tornado. Students at Hanover College were getting ready for exams. Frank Baker is currently the campus historian. In 1974, he was a professor of journalism.
I was in the campus center and listening to a speaker from Germany in an upper room. There were lots of students there, 50 or 60, maybe more. And we heard on the loudspeaker that there was something coming, probably a tornado, and we should go down to the lower floor. That was 2 floors down from where we were. And so, being polite, I let the students get out first, and I came out with a number of other faculty members, and we started down the stairway, and we were halfway down on the landing when the tornado came through. And fortunately, the glass that was there did not break. We got down safely and got to the basement of the building. Then we were told that a second tornado was coming, which turned out not to be true. And I just ignored the comment, and I got outside and said to myself, I have got to get my camera because I must take photographs of this.
Dennis Covener is in charge of the library's archives today. In 1974, he was a sophomore at Hanover. He and other students in his fraternity went out to watch the tornado, at least for a while.
As the clouds right above our heads started circling around, we decided that's probably long enough. And then we went inside, got under the tables downstairs, and heard it pass.
And I finally got to my house, and I found that 44 trees had been destroyed, had been toppled over. And of course, my wife was wondering where I was when I was taking pictures, because one of the photographs I took on the way was the water tower, which was right next to the house where we lived for 16 years. The house had been dismantled in 1967, so that it was not there anymore. And I often wondered what would have happened if we had been living there and the house had been standing when the tornado came along.
Just before 4 o'clock, the tornado hit Madison. Dale Wilson was at his job as production manager at the Madison Courier newspaper when the storm hit.
As soon as we found out a tornado had gone through, I took off with the camera, and of course some of the other people that lived downtown went out with cameras also to get pictures for the paper. And all roads out of the downtown area were completely blocked.
The downed trees, like this one on highways 56 and 62 west of Madison, also blocked rescue vehicles' access to the area. Tornado victims often assisted each other, like this man helping a woman to an ambulance which took her to King's Daughters Hospital.
It's hard to imagine the destruction that the tornado did. Buildings just completely gone. There was, and in the half a block away, the buildings not even touched. It's just hard to imagine how that wind works.
The hilltop area overlooking Madison's downtown was hardest hit. Most of the homes in Madison suffered some damage. 1 out of every 6 was destroyed. The Clifty Creek power plant was also heavily damaged.
If you notice the power plant down there, they have a big switch yard. And all it is steel towers in there. And that just looked like somebody's spaghetti, all bent up and in piles.
When the storm cleared, 7 people were found dead. Dale Wilson knew one of them, a friend who lived in a trailer.
Some of us went up to his trailer and we couldn't find him, and we didn't have enough equipment or anything like that to dig around. But eventually they did find him, and he was underneath his trailer.
Before the thunderstorm dissipated, it produced 4 more tornadoes as it tore across southeast Indiana into southwest Ohio.
Will Fleeton Creek, a house exploded. 460. Creek and Plainfield is a shambles. This whole neighborhood, Hutchinson Road, has been wiped out. Houses leveled, wires, poles, and power down. You better send everything you can get over here.
In Brandenburg, Kentucky, hardly anyone had any warning.
The superintendent of the schools, Mr. Stuart Pepper, and I were looking at a ball field behind the high school. And he saw this big black cloud to the southwest, and he said, we better take cover. And I hesitated. I said, oh, it's just a cloud. It'll go around. He said, no, we better get in cover. And we went to the elementary school, and when we did, the top left the school. We were on the floor, of course, and the only cut I got was on my left hand here, about 1.5 inch long scar. You can see it now, and that's the only cut I got out of the whole shebang.
Monk Ross had been mayor of Brandenburg only 3 months and 4 days. Now he had to direct the recovery effort in a town which had seen most of its basic services destroyed. The West Hill area was especially hard hit. The Phyllis Memorial Baptist Church was demolished. Downtown, the courthouse that had stood for over 100 years was a pile of rubble, along with one side of Brandenburg's main street. Of all the tornadoes which occurred that day, we now believe the Brandenburg tornado was the strongest.
Everything in the path of the tornado, it took it. That was the courthouse, the city hall, and the fire station, and everything we had was right in that path.
Mary Helen Chisholm worked and lived at the jail with her husband, who was the jailer. The day of the tornado, she and her daughter were in Louisville.
When I came back, I knew nothing had happened until I got to Worley's store at Brandenburg Station, and someone told me that there wasn't anything left in Brandenburg.
Richard Condor was in the funeral home as the tornado approached.
It had been on the TV or the radio that there was a tornado headed in this direction. Well, the first thing I did, I lived upstairs in an apartment above the funeral home, and I came downstairs and I came out on the front porch, and when I did, I heard the noise of the tornado coming from this direction here, and in a few minutes there was great big drops of water beginning to hit the street out here. They were huge, big as a plate almost. These huge drops of, hit the ground there.
We realized that it was the tornado when the house went off of our head. We were in the basement and it just completely took the house and everything in it. And then we came out, or I came up the steps to come out, and then I looked back and I could tell it was very devastating. And when I looked up towards the church, I knew the church wasn't there.
By the time we got to the bottom of the steps and got up in a corner, it was here. The building began to go away. And within just a few seconds, it was all over. And to get out of the basement, we had to climb up the wall. The basement wall, we pushed each other up, and one of us got up to the top, pulled it, helped get the other two boys out. And the sun was shining at that time just about like it is right now. It was all over with.
Of course, we notified Fort Knox the first thing, and Fort Knox came down with doctors, nurses, and helicopters. And that was really a big asset, because we didn't have any ambulances, no funeral home or nothing to take the people to. So they came down and they helped us, and they were a big help for Brandenburg that day.
We could hear the people screaming, and also what we did, we tried to get the people who was injured, and we put them on boards. And then my wife and I, we carried them up to the Baptist church, because that's as far as any of the vehicles could get.
Then we started out all over Brandenburg picking up bodies. And we picked up 31 that afternoon and taken them to the high school gym and laid them on the floor, and then as they brought them in, we identified them.
The shift that I relieved left, and when thunderstorms were just starting to break out, and at that particular day, our electronic technician, his name is Jim McFarland, he was operating a radar, and we had an old World War II radar, and I remember he came out of the radar room and says, see, everybody was gathered around the window, and he said, it should be about 2.5 miles away, you ought to be able to see it. And we all were looking outside the window, and we saw these big, low-hanging black clouds. They weren't really circulating, coming towards us, and that was the beginning of the tornado.
Meanwhile, WHAS Radio's Dick Gilbert was taking off for his regular afternoon traffic reports.
And boy, when I got out to Dixie Highway, or just a little bit southwest of the racetrack, really, I looked down there, and it's low, kind of a low overcast and some kind of a misty thing, and it was a kind of chartreuse color. And I have learned that this means you're going to have some rough weather, usually bad thunderstorms, lightning, and all that stuff. Well, I don't need that, you know. So instead of going on down Dixie Highway like I normally do, I just turned left and asked Standiford if I could come across the Waterston Expressway and head on out to Bowman Field. I thought I'd get over here in the east end of town, let the storm go on through, up across the river, and then I can go on with my business, as I do every time a bad storm comes through. So Jeff Douglas was our anchorman there at WHAS then. And these reports started coming in from the Weather Bureau and the Highway Patrol. They had seen a hook or a touchdown or something or other. And I still didn't believe, I mean, this is my hometown. A tornado in Louisville? Ridiculous, you know. I thought they were just making a big deal out of it. And I guess I was over about Taylorsville Road, and well, right just off Bowman Field area. And Jeff came to me for a report. And as he was talking, as he was introducing me, he said to himself, kind of on air, he says, "Gee whiz, we've got a guy up here that can see it all." So he just kind of turned the program over to me.
Here's what it looked like from downtown Louisville. Meteorologist John Burke watched it take shape.
Well, at the moment it came across, I was standing at the window looking out, and we knew that tornadoes were around. They had been occurring for several hours prior to this. As a matter of fact, the big tornado that tore up Brandenburg was about an hour prior to this. At that time, we thought the Brandenburg tornado was coming over Louisville, but the one in Louisville developed just west of the airport and went on to the northeast.
And as I was talking, suddenly the bottom of it, just like a bathtub, had overflowed upstairs and the ceiling had caved in. That's exactly the way the ceiling looked there. And here comes this black thing down. Looking back over my shoulder, it looked like about the fairgrounds. And so I told him what it looked like, where it was starting from, and I decided, well, I know it's moving northeast, and I know that they never move more than 45 miles an hour, and I can do a little better than that in the copter.
That was my first view of a tornado, and hopefully the last one. Black clouds all the way down to the ground, and obviously these were churning up very violent winds at the time. You could see stuff flying through the air, and pieces of metal, signs, what have you, coming right just north of the airport terminal building where I was at that time. I was on the phone to one of the announcers down at the VHS, and as it came across, and I thought it was time for me to get out of there.
We're hitting winds up the good gracious sakes alive.
How high is the wind speed at this time?
There's 50 right there. By golly, the whole thing's going, here I'm going, come on.
No point in standing in a wide open glass window with a tornado approaching, so I got out.
Of course, when the rocks started flying off the roof of the terminal building, at that time we was at Lee Terminal, and hailstones started hitting the window, although they were small. People started running every which way.
After we realized that it really was a tornado, I didn't think it was. I decided to go around and verify these reports I'd heard at the fairgrounds. Well, you have to leave Bowman Field's control zone, and you have to have permission to enter Stanford's control zone, so I called the tower. And I said, Stanford, this is, I've forgotten the number now, 840 Echo. I said, I'm over here by Bowman, I'd like to come back over and take a look at the fairgrounds. And of course, they had vacated the tower, I guess, and this guy wasn't close to the mic for a while. He says, Dick, he said, you're the only aircraft in the air for a 100-mile radius of Louisville. He says, you can do anything you want to.
The tornado was first sighted coming over top of Iroquois Hill. It had not yet touched the ground at that point, but by the time it got to Freedom Hall, it had almost come to the ground and knocked off part of the roof of Freedom Hall. By the time it got beyond Freedom Hall, the horse barns were in its path. They were leveled.
This tornado touched down right here at the horse barns on the North-South Expressway, and it has turned over several cars. And let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I would say 8 automobiles have been blown across the road or turned over. There's an ambulance here working in the road. Now the wind damage hit the roof of Freedom Hall, and it tore 3 big holes in the roof. Then it moved over on the eastern end of the building and ripped off about a third of the roof here. The horse barns are no more. It totally wiped out the horse barns.
Then the twister moved through Audubon Park and beyond.
Okay, I am over Cave Hill Cemetery now. First of all, let me say this. Traffic is at a standstill throughout the city. There are trees all over the pavements. Roads are blocked. I can't even begin to give alternates.
But it never looked like the Wizard of Oz, the tight spiral, that sinuous thing like an elephant's trunk that's moving around. It never got that tight. It was wider and had a slight taper to it. Of course, I'm behind the thing now. I don't know what, a mile or 2 miles behind it. And I can see the path it's making. It's very narrow when it started. When it crossed the expressway and went through that suburb over there, it was pretty narrow. It could go between 2 houses and just wipe out the garages and not really damage the houses.
Well, it's a spectacular sight. The low clouds, very black low clouds. At the moment, they're just about over Bowman Field out at the Taylorsville Road area. and it is swirling around, and it looks like smoke underneath it. There is no real tight, definitive tornado as such. It's still turning in a large, yes, there's one now. Started, yes, dipping down from the bottom of the cloud, and let's see, that will be over in the highlands, and probably along Bardstown Road and somewhere near Eastern Parkway is where I guess that one is.
And I said, this thing is heading right toward the highlands, and thinking back, I figured, well, it should hit pretty close to Bardstown Road and Eastern Parkway. I missed it a block. It was the simplest broadcasting I've ever done because the power transformers were being shorted out. And each time they shorted out, there's this brilliant burst of blue-white light. And I could follow the path of it. It was almost like lining up a surveyor's thing.
A 4-block area between Eastern Parkway and Bonnycastle Avenue was particularly hard hit. Telephone poles snapped and fell to the street. It was impassable within seconds. On nearby Stevens Avenue, cars were tossed around like toys. For many people, the only possible reaction was shock.
Huge trees down all over Newburgh Road, and the Bardstown Road signboards and pieces of roofing caught in the telephone wires and the whole bit. It looked like World War III.
Moments later, the tornado devastated Cherokee Park, destroying 2,000 trees in about a minute.
But right below me here, this is absolutely, this is as bad as I've seen anywhere. The whole park over here, Seneca Cherokee Park, there aren't any trees left in Cherokee Park. It has ripped everything down here by the golf course and over to the tunnel.
Well, I told him, I said, this is getting over by the tunnel on I-64. But the irregularity of the terrain there, I thought, sure, it would break up. And that it did not. It stayed on the ground there, went up Cochran Hill and over Cross Hill Road and down to Grinstead Drive. Usually when they come over a hill like that, they will skip. You won't have any damage on the lee side of the hill. Not in this one. One woman over on Cross Hill Road said they gathered the kids and went down the basement, started down the basement steps. She reached back, shut the door. It hit right then, took the whole house. They were saved, but the door in the house and the whole first floor went right off as they went down the basement steps. That's cutting it pretty fine.
From Grinstead Drive and Cochran Hill, the tornado went on to strike the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary.
I knew which way they went. I knew what they could do. But normally they don't stay on the ground that long. The contact, the ground contact, the irregularities of the surface, they're so erratic that it doesn't take much to have one actually disappear. It can pick up and skip for hundreds of yards or miles before it comes down again.
Look at the destruction here on Grinstead Drive. The high winds blew this car out of the street and partway up the hill. Notice the crease in the car's roof where it rolled over the stone wall. The tornado moved on. It struck Birchwood and Stilts Avenues and Crescent Court. Then the twister tore across Frankfort Avenue. It struck the Louisville Water Company's Crescent Hill filtration and pumping plant. You can see the path the tornado took by the flattened trees next to the reservoir. The winds knocked down telephone poles, destroyed sections of the railings around the reservoir, and tossed this pickup truck into the reservoir. The damage caused a water shortage for the next 24 hours. The area around the water company was also hard hit. Among the homes heavily damaged was the house where Dick Gilbert was born.
I'm over the Crescent Hill water tank, and this is a disaster area out here. I can't even begin to describe to you the damage that this has had. I've checked tornadoes through Iowa and Indiana, and I've never seen anything like this. My old homestead here, Pennsylvania Avenue, is Pennsylvania and Hillcrest are just about wiped out up here at Frankfort Avenue. Stilts, Grinstead, it went right between Barrett Junior High School and the Baptist Seminary and just wiped everything out. Roofs, trees, the whole bit. This area is no longer an effective community.
Well, it kind of shook me up. Of course, it was a bungalow type thing sitting up on a terrace, and the roof had been peeled back, kind of damaged and pushed back. The houses on either side were not. In other words, that's the path. It came up Stilts Avenue to Frankfort Avenue, and it crossed the railroad tracks at about Hillcrest and Pennsylvania. It wiped out the first two houses there. Now, we were the seventh house back on Pennsylvania Avenue. And as I say, the 6th and the 8th house weren't, apparently, visually, were not damaged. But I could see in our old living room. I could see the fireplace and part of the beam ceiling in the old living room as I went on. I thought, oh boy.
Gilbert was even concerned about his own daughter at his St. Matthew's home, and he had a plan for a possible rescue attempt.
And I can land right out here where the streets intersect. There's enough room for me to land there in an emergency. If I thought it was coming by here, I was going to land and pick up Candy the dog and take them with me. So I flew over real low here and circled around and pointed back to her. And she nodded her head and held up her portable radio and a flashlight, and she was in the basement. But I could tell that its path was not going to come anywhere near here, you know.
Less than 20 minutes after it had formed over the fairgrounds, it reached Brownsboro Road. It hit Chenoweth Elementary School, Bowers Restaurant, and over 100 homes in rolling fields.
At that particular moment, I had gone up on Shelbyville Road to gas up my police unit. And the day itself wasn't any particularly different day weather-wise. It was kind of balmy, and clouds started moving in late in the afternoon.
My youngest daughter was in high school and had come home, and we didn't have the radio on. And a friend of hers called and said, you know, there's a tornado coming. It just hit Standiford Field. And stupidly, we ran outside to see. It was very sunny, and the only immediate thought, I mean, it sounded just like a freight train.
When I saw clouds dip down out of the sky in no particular funnel shape, just like a base of clouds dipping down, my best recollection of that was the fact of the flashes in the sky, where you could see where the cloud moved across Frankfort Avenue, I assume farther down, and all the power lines and transformers were blowing, just like flash bulbs going up all up and down the road.
Bunch Griffin was talking to a neighbor on the phone as the tornado approached.
Do you hear what I hear? It's either a train that's jumped the tracks in St. Matthews, or we're having a tornado. Bang! And then I ran, luckily I ran to the back porch and I threw open all the windows I could throw open, and I could hear this old thing coming closer and closer, and I was alone in the house. Everybody was gone. And I went to the basement, and it seemed like a half an hour, but it was just about 10 seconds or something like that, and wow, you feel like your head's going to blow up.
So I immediately turned on Chenoweth Lane and headed back towards the city, only to be met by trees that were down across the roadway. I really had a difficult time at first negotiating, and once I understood the magnitude of the problem of the storm, I had to start cutting through driveways, cutting through lawns, everything I could do to get around to get back down here.
Then it came across the Crescent Hill Golf Club, and I'm over Indian Hills right now, and I can't even begin to count. I would guess 200 homes out here have at least the second floor gone. Many of them are completely demolished, and most of them are, the walls are askew, the roof is sagging, and so forth.
Oh, it was terrible, the pressure. So then when I came up, I stepped over all the rubble, and the windows were blown out, but not the roof. Our house was inhabitable, but anyhow, I went out in the middle of the street, and everybody had come out of their houses to compare the damage.
We put the radio on and began hearing reports, and so I went out, being the mayor, and started to get up the street, and that's when I began to see the houses, you know, certain areas were hit. I never got to all of them, but to see some that were so totally destroyed and to be so worried about who was hurt and what had happened.
Several places in Indian Hills and rolling fields were devastated. In Indian Hills, particularly the southern part of the city, the trees were just down across roadways. People had pitched in to help with chainsaws, anything they could do to get the roadways open for emergency vehicles to get in and check. Once they got grouped up and we got people together, we just started doing a house-to-house check, looking for survivors, marking the houses when it was found that there was nobody in there. A lot of people started leaving messages for loved ones saying, I'm not here, I'm at so-and-so. It was just a superhuman effort by a lot of people to protect what was left and to assist people in any way they could.
The tornado continued its destructive path, striking Dunn Elementary School and moving across Northfield. By the time the twister roared through Limekiln Lane area, it had begun to lose some of its fury. It did move across Prospect into Oldham County, where it dissipated. 21 miles of destruction in 22 minutes. Around 6 o'clock, another twister struck the southern edge of Frankfort. The Evergreen Road area was hardest hit. One couple was killed across the street from Evergreen Baptist Church. The church building and the pastor's house down the street were both destroyed. Several members of the church had close calls.
I was at home with my two children. I had a 7 and an 11-year-old. When the tornado actually hit, we were in the basement. My mom had called. At the time we were upstairs. My mom had called and said, "Get to the basement with the kids." I said, "Oh, Mother, they're always saying that. There's not going to be a tornado, you know, like everybody does." And she said, "Ann, get to the basement." So I grabbed the kids, went to the basement, and then as soon as I got down there, I remembered I don't have a radio, a flashlight, or anything. So I ran back upstairs to get my radio and flashlight. I stuck my head out the door. I said, "Oh, it's not going to do anything. It's still out there." But went on to the basement, like a good daughter should, and just about the time I got to the bottom step, it all broke loose.
We were in my father-in-law's trailer, which was adjacent to our house. And I went out the front door and looked up the river toward I-64, and it's just a big sheet of water coming down. I didn't see a funnel or anything. Sounded like maybe 10 or 12 locomotives, a lot of noise in that respect. So I go back in, and I tell my wife, my father-in-law, we better go over to the house. It's brick, and it'd probably be safer. It looked like we were going to have a storm. So we had 3 dogs, each one of us got a dog, and I remember when I reached for the doorknob, the thing hit us. And it picked the trailer up, and we live right on the river, and it was moving us away from the river, though, and left us about that position. After it went by, well, we lay down on the floor, and I remember looking through the end of the trailer, all the glass, and you can see trees going by and everything. I saw parts of one of our neighbors' houses going by way up high and made a circle and came back.
Thinking that we were probably hit worse than anybody else, you know, I thought, man, we got really hit bad. We went outside, you know, minor damage to our house, gutters, fence, minor things. And then our next door neighbor was a Kentucky State policeman. And he came checking on all of us because my husband was in Lexington working. And he came to check on us. And he said, "Well, I'm going on up the road to see what's happened up there." And he came back in a few minutes and he said, "Don't you all go up there, it's bad."
And I walk up the road and see about my father. So when I got about halfway up there, I met my nephew and 2 of my brothers, and they said they'd found my dad, and he was dead.
Biggest problem was getting word to our families that we were okay. Phones were down and everything, so somebody came through and was going on out, and I just said, "Call Mom and Dad, tell them we're okay. Call my husband, tell him to come home."
The tornado also struck Woodson and Roxy Duvall's farm.
All of a sudden, trees began uprooting down there, and there was just dust and debris flying through the air. But actually, that's all we saw. We didn't see the tornado, nor did we hear the freight train noise that other folks did.
We got hit across the face with the 2 before, and I looked up, there's no house, no church, no anything in sight.
All that was left was the floor around us. The house was just lifted up and scattered out into the front yard, I suppose.
The twister also tore across Versailles Road, demolishing this service station and numerous houses. The Capital City Christian Church building was all but leveled. When it struck jet to the southeast, it killed 4 people. Then the cleanup began. In Cherokee Park, it would take weeks to clear away the thousands of trees the storm had destroyed. New trees were being planted, but at least one estimate said it would take 80 years before the park looked as good as it did before the tornado. In the Bardstown Road area, Louisville Gas and Electric Company crews worked around the clock to restore utilities. The National Guard was called out to help with the cleanup and protect residents from looters. In Madison, Indiana, residents also began the long recovery process. This home overlooking the Ohio River suffered $50,000 in damage. A playground at the Michigan Road School showed the force of the storm. Even the Burger Chef, a local landmark where teenagers spent time cruising, wasn't spared. The Red Cross and Salvation Army helped homeless residents. At Hanover College, President John Horner coordinated relief efforts.
That particular morning, the president called a meeting of the faculty in a room in the center, and he told us that school, which was supposed to start it's spring vacation right that very day, as I remember, or at least the next day. We'd have to, of course, start school, dismiss school immediately, and that with any kind of luck, we would be able to start school in about 3 weeks, which is longer than the vacation was scheduled to be. And I remember very vividly what happened right after that, that people from all over this state and from Kentucky and Ohio just sort of descended on Hanover with their bulldozers and their chainsaws and all sorts of things, and they were in my yard all around helping people to get some of these things cut down and the trees hauled away and so forth. And it was a dramatic example of what people will do for people who are in trouble.
Some students were sent home for an early spring break. Those who remained on campus had to make do the best they could.
The particular problem was water for people here, because we got water in the town much sooner than they did here. And people came over to our house to take showers and all that sort of thing during that period because they had no water at all.
The initial stages of the rebuilding, I was of course gone. They'd sent the students home a few days afterward, and then we came back the 22nd of April. So we were only closed for about 2 weeks or so, which was sort of remarkable for the amount of damage.
There was no electricity at home, and we had no water because the water pumps were operated by electricity. Fortunately, we had gas, and we could get some heat. It was a cold day. It was around freezing, as I remembered. And we checked with other people around, and we found a man who was going to Columbus to notify my children that we were fine. And one of them didn't even know there was a tornado here.
The storm had destroyed or damaged every major building on campus, except the chapel.
We, at this campus, were very, very fortunate. The tornado was over 200 miles an hour, as I understand it. It took off mainly the roofs of the buildings here. Most of them that were damaged by tree falling, not by the tornado itself. And as we are reasonably sure that if the tornado had been a few feet lower, we would have had much, much more damage than we did. Even then, the estimate was approximately $10 million, and most of that was covered by insurance.
The college actually took advantage of the disaster to make improvements in its physical plant. Storm damage forced officials to make repairs that were already long overdue. They ordered improvements such as burying telephone and electric lines, which only added to the beauty of the campus.
Hanover College lost many buildings and some old trees. They did rebuild. Of course, it was expensive. I don't know how much all this cost, but it's an enormous expense to insurance companies and the people that did have to pay.
Even this bird had to find a new home. It made its nest in this broken light fixture. Then there was the curious fate of the water tower, which Frank Baker had photographed. But the thousands of gallons of water in the tank were gone. The leading theory says the tornado sucked up the water and took it along. You see, most people who lived through the tornado had their share of strange stories to tell as well, some of which are still recounted today the way you'd tell a tall tale.
And then they told me later that they had found, I believe the story was that they found a folding chair, or more than one folding chair, with Freedom Hall stenciled on it. They found it in Cincinnati. That this thing had been sucked up, and apparently in the upper air took it right on through. I don't know. That's a little bit weird, I think.
Bunk Ross told the odd story of one Brandenburg couple.
They were on their way. They were back from a funeral over at E-Town that day. A native of Brandenburg was buried that afternoon, and they came home and they had this big, beautiful home, and they were changing from their Sunday clothes to work clothes, and it blew their house away and left them just in their underwear. They ran. They were elderly people at that time, and they ran through the debris down to our store to get some clothing, and all they had on was just their underwear.
Most of the stories in Brandenburg were much more tragic, however. As residents began the cleanup, they buried their dead.
It's very terrifying, and you just try to get it out of your mind that what your town looked like when you left it and what you've come back to. You really hardly realized where you were. There were live lines, the current hadn't been cut off, and it was just terrifying.
The people, they worked together real hard, and then people came in from everywhere to help. And if it hadn't been for that, I don't know what we would have done, but we had people from Oklahoma to come in by bus to help us. And of course the Red Cross moved in that very night.
Monk Ross says the mass funeral at the high school was one of the saddest events he'd ever witnessed.
Well, there's children, as same as older people, you know, and that was really a sad event when you have little children, you know, just babies, and especially one family that every member of the family but the husband was killed.
I didn't go to the memorial that was over at the school. It was just a little more than I could cope with.
It took about a year and a half to rebuild the major structures downtown and for the town's main street to return to normal. But some of the physical scars still haven't healed. You can still see this bare spot on a hill across the river from Brandenburg where the tornado struck. But the Phyllis Memorial Church was rebuilt. It's now called the First Baptist Church. Look along this wall. You can see where the new structure was built onto what remained of the old one.
I noticed for a long time people were definitely more united and were willing to help one another and stick together. It's a terrible thing to say that it takes a disaster to pull the people together, but that disaster really pulled the people together closely. And they're still that way.
It'll never be the same, but life has to go on, you know. You have to pick up the pieces, and this is what Meade County people, not only Meade County people, Indiana, they came far and near, other states, so it was, unless you're there, you can't believe just what people did come and do.
You try not to think about it so much, but there's still times when you get ready to look for something, you think, oh, that went away in the tornado, you know. So, but it's been hard for everybody. But I think most of us are healed physically and mentally from it. And there's one thing I can say, I mean, you know, you put a lot of value, I guess, on the material things of life. But we was fortunate. We did not lose any individual in our family. And the material things that we lost could be replaced because our friends can't.
20 years from the tornado, we've learned a lot. We have a more organized DES operation. The sirens from all over the town now work. And we have more fire departments which can fall in line to help out with a tornado. We were in a sad shape. Nobody knew what to do. We hadn't any experience, and but now the people around here are experienced. They could venture out to help other people and tell them what to cope with. Anyone who was in that tornado will never forget it, because you can't visualize what a tornado can do so quickly. It came through the town and just devastated, and I'd say it lasted a minute, maybe a minute and a half, till it was gone.
The Indian Hills Rolling Fields area also coped with the disaster.
Well, the cleanup effort took forever. Once the National Guard got here and posted the areas which assisted the police in keeping people out during the curfew violation, then bringing in the construction equipment. You can imagine at that time where so much devastation was done in so many different places, it was really difficult getting heavy equipment in. Once they got it in, they got the roadways cleared first, then the people started reconstructing. A lot of people rebuilt. A lot of people replanted. A big thing, of course, the tornado took out was a lot of trees. It's a heavily treed area, and some areas are still not barren, but not up to what they were before the tornado.
Officials also had to take precautions against looters and sightseers.
We began to be able to get out and survey a little bit more and found that we were beginning to have people coming in from all areas with somewhat nefarious ideas. Actually, though, some were bringing picnic baskets, if that seems possible, to picnic in someone's yard or on their front porch, although the house might be partially destroyed.
We kind of regrouped, set up a command post down at the Second Presbyterian Church at first. Tried to get more people in to protect the area, to protect the people's property from criminals who would take advantage of a crime of opportunity and such. We started setting up, all the emergency help started coming in. The Salvation Army set up an outpost. to feed the people, to feed the police officers, firefighters, or rescue people.
It was quite an experience, and we were just lucky. If you walked by there right after that and saw the devastation, you could not believe that people weren't killed or even seriously hurt.
Residents also had to cope with unscrupulous repairmen.
Some of those strangers that came in were people that were holding us up to put tarps over our roofs or do something for us. And praise be to God, this young man, fresh back from Vietnam, Mac Barr, came in here, Captain Mac Barr of the U.S. Marines, and he came in and ordered these guys out.
The Boy Scouts were a much more welcome sight as they arrived with their ropes and axes to help with the cleanup.
From that moment on, we sure all pulled together, and we couldn't have made it without, of course, God's grace saved us. And we couldn't have done it without the Second Presbyterian Church.
As you see that behind me, the crosses in the door, the glass was blown out of those. And we were in there, and people, so many people had lost everything, and so they were wearing borrowed clothes that didn't necessarily fit them, and we would sit there and look out the windows over here, and it looked like a war zone, and there was no electricity, so we had guitar and music, and then everyone just got up and talked a little bit about their experiences, and I think that probably has stuck with me more than anything else.
Never will forget that the first few days before they could get the facilities going and electricity to the church, they imported fast foods for everybody. One time I must have seen 400 or 500 McDonald's Big Macs in there, and then there was Kentucky Fried Chicken, and everybody contributed to help the people out.
I think with the exception of one, actually, most houses were rebuilt. But even today, 20 years later, in certain areas such as West Wind Road, you can still see the trees are not, there was such a heavily treed area, and it will never be the same because people didn't plant as many trees. Many of those were originally there when they built the houses. And so you can see a difference, and I guess you always will. It'll never quite be the same.
We had a party 3 weeks later for all the survivors, and we had about 150 people, and they all came in, and it was wonderful, and we gave everybody a patch and said something about them.
In my 21 years in this line of work, I hope I never see anything like that again. The devastation was just beyond comprehension. When you first look at it and you look back at it 20 years ago, you just can't help but be thankful that so many people survived it. If that had come through 2, 3, or 4 o'clock in the morning, it's just no telling how many people would have suffered.
For some people in Frankfort, it took a long while for life to return to normal.
But after that, for the following month, it seemed like every other day there was a tornado alert out. And across the river from us is the railroad tracks, and those trains would come up there every night about 7 o'clock. And when they did, you just swear that it was a tornado coming again. So we were kind of jittery for a while.
And the rest of the Evergreen Baptist Church congregation surveyed the damage and wondered how long it would take to rebuild.
The next morning, after daylight, well, then we came on up here and could see our neighbors and our church, and I was so totally destroyed. The people, our church family, grew so close as a result of it all. You know, tragedies do bring families back together, I think, and this certainly did. It was difficult for our pastor because he lost his home and everything, and to have to deal with rebuilding a church as well as his home, but it was all accomplished.
Within 18 months, the church had completed construction of a brand new building. In Jet, near Frankfort, National Guardsmen and State Police worked roadblocks like this one near I-64, keeping away sightseers. Dick Gilbert never anticipated the public's reaction to his work that day.
And I came on home. I didn't think anything about it. I mean, that's what you do. They want you up if it's bad weather. If there's snow, if there's fog, that's what a traffic copter is up there for. So I was amazed, and Hugh Barr, who was the program director then, he was absolutely dumbfounded the next day when the mail started coming in and all this other stuff. They made me out to be some kind of a hero, and I never felt that I did anything particularly special. I'm not getting close to the darn thing. I'm going to give it all the room it wants. You know, it's like the old story, what does a 500-pound gorilla want? Anything he wants to do, he can do it. That's what that storm affected me that way.
Gilbert's aerial reports won him the Helicopter Association of America's award as Pilot of the Year. President Nixon sent him a letter of congratulations and a plaque. Even after 10 years of retirement, Someone occasionally recognizes his voice.
The thing that scares me is that some people said, "You made it sound so interesting." We ran upstairs and looked out the window to watch it, which of course is the absolute worst thing you could possibly do. And for years out there beyond the Northfield, in those valleys out there, hundreds and hundreds of trees lying down in the same direction that the force of that thing did.
And that was a wild, wild day. That day, of course, more tornadoes occurred than any time in history around the United States. It was a wild outbreak that day.
By the time you hear a tornado warning, it's too late to make plans. You have to be prepared before you hear the warning on TV or radio, or before you actually see a twister coming your way. You should be aware of any disaster plan in your workplace, and make sure you devise one for your own home.
If you're not in constant contact with the thing, you tend to let your standards down, I think, is the answer to that. That's, you see these things that we have a warning that comes across the top of the TV screen and we're under a warning or an alert or whatever and so forth, and I think people begin to say, oh, well, there's another one of those, you know. They don't really make preparations or think about where they would go, where the strongest part of the house is in terms of arches or supports or bearing walls coming together, so that if a roof does fall in, that you have some protection.
Here are the do's and don'ts. Most of them are common sense. Do have a disaster plan. Create one for your own home and be aware of what the plan is in your workplace. Do listen to NOAA Weather Radio. You'll find it between 162.4 and 162.55 megahertz on your public service band. Make sure you buy a battery-powered weather band radio with a warning alarm. Do take cover in your basement, or if you don't have a basement, in an interior room that doesn't have any windows. Do watch the weather itself for clues as to what might happen next in your area. Clouds that grow darker, strong winds, large hail, and frequent lightning are all signs that a tornado could form. Don't ignore weather warnings. Once again, being prepared gives you the best chance of survival. Don't try to escape. Even in a car or a truck, you can't outrun a tornado. Don't open windows or doors. The idea that you're equalizing the pressure inside your house and that it's less likely to suffer severe damage is a myth. Don't stay in a mobile home. Nearly half of all the people killed by tornadoes in recent years were trying to ride out storms in their mobile homes. Get out and take shelter in a ditch or ravine or a nearby shelter if you can. Lie flat and make sure to cover your head. Don't light matches or candles or cigarettes. There could be a gas leak in the building in which you're taking cover. Lighting any kind of flame could cause a possibly fatal explosion or fire.
Be prepared for a storm, and if and when it does come, take cover. For God's sakes, get in a hole or get behind something or get a shelter, because it can happen so quickly that it's just unbelievable how quick it can happen.
They can drive a piece of wheat right through a telephone pole. Think about that for a while. It's forces that are gigantic. You can't grasp these things. So they deserve all the safety procedures. You should always have a battery-powered radio and a flashlight and maybe some water, 5 gallons of water at least in a thermos jug or something like this, so that if it does get you, why at least you're not helpless. You know what's going on, and if your lights fail, you still can feel your way around the basement or signal somebody to dig you out if the worst happens.
All I can say is, not even at that time, I thought tornadoes were a very violent storm, and I'm convinced now that after seeing one that they are an exceptionally violent act of nature, and no way to control them, of course, but I hope I never see another one.